Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and a Patreon replay from Andy CX in the Somers, a ship I don't believe I've had on the channel before. This is a tier 10 steel destroyer representing the Somers class, which we don't otherwise have in game, and it basically packs the gearing torps, but it has two more of them in quad launcher arrangement as opposed to the quintuple launchers on the gearing. Now, talking of gearings, there's one that's actually a bit to the south of Andy. Andy is a bit further forwards here at the moment, and you'd think somebody who's gotten to tier 10 in a destroyer would know to be careful about torping into the path of allies that are ahead of you. But apparently this gearing is a bit of a tool, because, yeah, that happened. There's no real reason for them to have made that drop from back there. It was obviously just a random spread sent out into the cap with absolutely no regard for Andy being where he is, and so already, without even having been remotely spotted by the enemy, Andy has lost a good 40% of his hit points. So that's a nice start. At least he'll have a bit of an adrenaline rush boost now, right? I guess? Now he does actually strike lucky with his own torps into the enemy Halland. Take note gearing, you fire things at the enemy, not your allies. So that's a thing he doesn't have to gunfight, which is rather nice because the Halland is not a nice boat to run into. This thing, I mean, it's still got good guns, it's still got twin turrets, but I don't think it's quite as capable as a gunfire boat as the gearing is. I think that's the trade-off you pay. At least I think that's true. I know I checked the torp stats. I didn't compare the guns that closely. Yeah, no, the gearing does have a much better rate of fire. Okay, so yeah, essentially this is a much more torpedo-focused ship. But unlike the Benham, it's not so much the quickness of the reload. Benham is all about the number of torps it can spam out, and this can still spam out a decent amount of torps, but it's only two more than the gearing, and I think it does actually have a longer reload on its quad tubes as a result. But having three quad tubes as opposed to two quintuples does actually give you a bit more flexibility as to where you can drop as well. So, lo and behold, the gearing has learned nothing at all, and this time because they're pink already, now they've just taken half their own health as well. But at least Andy hasn't lost so much of his own, but that's still another, what, 10-ish%? I don't think he's quite down to 50% health yet, but he's not far from it. That gearing player is just an utter tool. At least when it comes to World of Warships. I don't know. Maybe they're a perfectly competent person when they're not playing video games, but the way that they play video games doesn't exactly fill me with hope. So that's even more health lost now, and that gearing has also hamstrung themselves too, rather badly. So, yeah, this is not off to a great start, despite having managed to kill that Halland. It's one of those times when some of your own teammates prove to be a bigger hazard than the enemy do. You'll note, of course, also no apologies or anything. I don't know what was going through this gearing player's mind, but yeah. I don't think I would ever want to be near them in anything with torpedoes, because clearly they cannot be trusted. So they've got this flank, they've got this cap. The few enemy ships that are to their north look like they're in a position to retreat. There might be another destroyer nearby, but I don't think there is. I think they've actually both been spotted on the other flank at this point. So that potentially gives some destroyers nice free rein to play with. But it's at this point that gearing decides they're going to open fire. It's probably for the best. Andy at least can now be reassured that it's not going to happen a third time. That is still, however, one of their own destroyers out of action, completely unnecessarily, but given the particular destroyer player we're talking about, it probably really is for the best. The Zhao the enemy Zhao's also just been taken out, so that leaves this flank basically consisting of these two battleships and then that Zhao and somewhat damaged Kerr first in the enemy's starting cap. In theory, the cluster of ships down there in G1H2 can now start to push up, and I mean, even if they stick on the 1-2 line, they can use those islands as cover a bit, and Andy can provide the spotting, but they seem to take a while to actually get going particularly. But given that there's nothing that can immediately spot Andy, it's one of those situations where maybe he can't complain too much. There's nothing really that can push into him necessarily that he can't just run away from. He's also got his US destroyer smokes available, so this is a pretty comfortable situation for basically any torpedo-based destroyer, and hopefully he's also going to pick up some spotting damage in the meantime too. So that looks like a nice spread of torps on the Thunderer. That's 3 hits there, and there we go. Another 4 from his, in fact all 4 of that second lot hit. So that's a dev strike on the Thunderer. That's quite nice. It probably means this Bourgogne is going to be rather more cautious, though, having seen that high health battleship just get completely nuked. And they're also kind of now heading away from Andy, so making this drop might be a bit trickier. This is the point where having his allies push up would certainly be handy. And they are, except for the Yamato, really, who's kind of faffing around still south of the cap, and maybe hasn't quite decided if they want to go and help the other flank or not. So Andy's almost at the cap. We've jumped ahead about a minute now, sitting nicely at 100k. The Zhao that was in the cap has gone down. The GK is actually pushed into the middle, so that leaves the Bourgogne as the current best, most likely target. But there are also ships still over in that far cap, the D cap. Or is that the C cap? I think that's the C cap actually. No. Is it B cap? I don't know. I can't. The minimap's too small. The cap that is currently not being capped by Andy, where the remainder of the enemy ships are. Yes, that took way too long to articulate. And while he's manoeuvring, he actually gets a bit too close to the Bourgogne there, but has landed some torp hits as well. I think that was not intentional. I don't imagine he meant to get himself spotted by the Bourgogne. But anyway, so that's another big, decent 40k-ish chunk of health, and as there was a flooding, he's going to try and stick a fire. But he gets a bit greedy here, I suspect. He doesn't wait until he's fully concealed by smoke to start firing. And so it gives the Bourgogne something to fire at, and he didn't lose a lot of health, but he still lost a bit and still got himself reset a bit with a cap as well. So that might have been a little bit of extra health he didn't have to lose there, but in the scheme of things, compared to what that gearing did to him, yeah. Anyway, it looks initially like he's not going to get any more hits, and then the Bourgogne actually swings around so that they've intercepted just the edge of this spread of torps, and they take a flooding, and it's at that point RNG goes, okay, yeah, here, have a fire as well. And that's another kill, which is rather nice. That's bumped his damage up even more, 164k, and he's also about to get the cap, putting this team quite firmly in the lead in terms of map control and points, but not necessarily kills. They're only a bit ahead in terms of kills. So torps out towards that GK in the middle, and it looks like that cruiser, that Des Moines, might be going in there as well, but there doesn't seem to be much risk of them running into his torps, which is fine. But it's at this stage things are getting a bit sticky once again, because the Petro pops their radar, and although Andy does have his speed boost available, he perhaps unwisely opens fire, because this is going to keep him spotted for longer than if he just tried to turn his tail, because of course Soviet radar does not last for very long. So if it's US radar, sometimes it's worth popping off a few salvos because it does just last longer. But oof, yeah, and I think this is the mistake that he made that's possibly going to cost him the most, because he's now down to less than 1,000 hit points. And I specify the mistake he's made, because if he hadn't eaten all of those gearing torpedoes, he would have so much more health right now. He would still be close to half health. But as it is, instead, he's down to just under 1,000 hit points. And that makes what's going to happen next maybe a little unpleasant, because he's got radio location. He knows there is an enemy destroyer close by. It's the gearing, and although he can outspot the gearing, it's not by a lot. And the gearing is low health, but he's lower health, and he just doesn't quite have time to react and get away. So although he lands hits and leaves the gearing on 64 health, it's not quite enough. He sadly doesn't get to take the gearing with him, but still 170k is not bad. And he said himself in the email, you know, if he just had that health that he hadn't lost to the allied gearing, maybe he could have done something. Anyway, so that gearing got taken out by blind fire. I think they lost a Venezia of their own as well, but it just counted down to 1,000 points at that stage, and that was the game. 170k, 14 torpedo hits and 3 kills, along with 2 dev strikes and that first blood, so 2,600. Unsurprisingly, the gearing, who torped him twice, down at the bottom of the team list. Yeah, that was not a player you really ever want to see on your own team. But fortunately they got taken out before they could really do too much more damage. So I think that was a pretty good showing for a ship I've not shown before, but it was certainly a more interesting game than it needed to be, thanks to that gearing, who then turned pink. And as I said towards the end there, I think maybe Andy could have played it a bit more cautiously. If he bumped into those destroyers with a little bit more health, he might have survived, but that's a big might have, because even if he hadn't taken that hit from the Petro that took him to less than 1,000 hit points, he still wouldn't have had that much more, but it might have been enough to at least take out the gearing for an extra kill, and who knows, maybe even get the Shimakaze as well, which could have been a Kraken. But that's a big hypothetical what if. As it was still a very good game and a very good result. So hopefully you enjoyed this replay and you're finding your holidays not too stressful. I've got something special lined up for tomorrow, by the way. And if you did enjoy the video, you can do all the usual things down underneath it. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.